Hi, my name is Avery Stroud, and today I'll be presenting my speech on the photo that changed history. This is my audience. And we're going to start the speech now. Japan has surrendered and the victors are celebrating, drinking, shouting, and dancing in the streets, as described by the September 2nd, 2016 edition of the NY Daily News. The VJ Day kiss will forever be remembered because of the symbolism and surprising story behind it. The photo was taken by Alfred Eichstädt and was published by the Life magazine August 27, 1945. Many people, like hopeless romantics, saw it as endearing, and others saw it as a promotion of sexual harassment. I think it's often overlooked that the kissers were actually strangers, and so today we're going to explore the story and the significance of this story. The beginning of the story starts August 14th, 1945. President Truman receives a letter of surrender and this event took August 10th, 1945, only a few days after the drop of the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This was seen in the article of the 2017 edition of InfoBase. And then President Truman, after this happened, he announced to the entire United States on August 14th, 1945, that the end of the war was finally over. And so a result of that was that people were dancing and shouting in the streets, and we got one of the most memorable photos of their era. It was so memorable that people said that the image captures the sense of relief, exhilaration, and unbridled joy brought by the news that Japan had surrendered and the most terrible war was over. I found this in the edition of December 2005 Gale Power Search. The man behind the camera, Albert Einstein, was seen as one of life's finest photographers. He fought in World War I, and after he came back from World War I, he had a bunch of shrapnel in his knee, and so that caused him to drop out of the war, and he turned to photography after that. And whenever he turned to photography, he started out shooting some small stuff, and then he caught the eye of the soon-to-be founder of Life magazine, and that's where his career took off. On the day of the end of the war being announced, he was in Times Square, and whenever he saw something white being grabbed, he turned around and clicked the moment the sailor kissed the nurse, and that became one of the most memorable photos of their era, according to the 2005 Gale Power Search. The identity of the kissers were unknown for a very long time. And 35 years after the photo was taken, George Mendonça came out and said that he was the Navy, the sailor in the picture that was kissing the woman. He enlisted in the Navy after Pearl Harbor and witnessed the attack on the USS Bunker Hill. According to the September 10th, 2016 edition of the NY Post, he helped pull hundreds of men, some horribly burned, out of the water and watched the nurses in awe. The impact of what he saw the nurses do had such an impact on him that he ended up finally saying that the nurses went right to work on these guys, and I mean these guys were really hurting. And when I saw what those nurses did, it stuck with him forever. Whenever the day of the announcement of the end of the war came, he was at a movie with his girlfriend Rita, and somebody came bursting in the doors of the movie theater, and so they immediately went to a bar where they were selling free shots, and he took as many shots as he could, and then he went down to Times Square where he saw what he thought to be a nurse and kissed her, walked away, and didn't even remember the next day. Now, there's always two sides to every story. The nurse, Greta Zimmer, was born in Austria and fled to the U.S. during World War II. Her and her sisters were among the last refugees to make it out, according to the September 10, 2016 edition of the NY Post. At the time of the announcement of the end of the war, Greta was 21 years old, and she was actually a dental assistant. She was not a nurse. And so whenever she heard of the end of the war, she went from her office down to Times Square, where she was surprisingly kissed by some random sailor that she didn't even know. And then he walked off, so then she just went back to her office. She claimed that the man was very strong and she was not kissing him, but he was kissing her, according to the September 10th edition of the NY Post. The story of the kissers isn't what the world expected, and it was one of the biggest plot twists I think we all could have never seen coming. The VJ Day photo was something that we will always remember because of its surprising plot twist, and then also because of the symbolism that is behind it. I think something that we should all take away from this is that at the time of the end of the war, everybody was extremely excited, and whenever you are extremely excited about the end of a war, it is obviously a good thing to give your thanks. And so the only way to give your thanks is obviously an act of love. And that is the end of my speech. And so now we are going to go into questions. Do y'all have any questions?
I have a question.
What is your question?
Do you think that Rita was upset that her boyfriend kissed another woman? Yeah.
So Rita exclaimed in one of the articles that I had read that she wasn't upset because she understood that he had been through a lot of stuff in the war and that he had seen a lot of stuff. And so whenever she saw that it was a nurse, she wasn't upset at all. Do we have any other questions? What's your question?
You talked earlier about sexual harassment and stuff like that, and how I'm having a hard time seeing sexual harassment in that. Can you explain how that comes to pass?
Yeah. So according to one of the articles that I read, it was said that the thoughts of sexual harassment were not produced until later on in time, so more like the 2000s, whenever people started to really openly talk about sexual harassment. And so I think that a lot of people kind of saw it, and since she didn't give consent for him to be kissed, people saw it as sexual harassment. Does that answer your question?
Sure.
All right, so then that is all that we have for today. Thank you.